Welcome to the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. We go to those on the front lines nationwide, bringing you special guests and topics facing Christians in today's world. We discuss matters of family, work, communities, and our nation, covering how to overcome life's challenges and embrace being bold for Jesus in our walk, God's Word, His promises, and how to share our faith boldly with others. Now let's get bold.
Welcome to the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. I am your host, Keith Atkinson, and today we have a guest, Bob Pruitt with Alliance Defending Freedom. Welcome, Bob.
Hello. Welcome, Keith. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm excited to hear about what ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, has going on these days and some of the things that you might have to encourage our listeners. But before we jump into that, I would love to just hear a little bit about your journey and how God has led you into the work that you're doing now.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, I started off as a civil litigator in Houston and did that for approximately 8 years, and then went in-house to a large automotive distributor. And then from there, went to a job at first as general counsel and then later as president, and helped run that for about 16 years. And then 4 years ago, made the jump into ADF. And I think it probably is worthwhile to unpack a little bit of that job I was helping run the company with, is that the Lord blessed the socks off our company. We were very successful financially. We were typically named a best place to work, both regionally and nationally. And we had, some really strong national clients and international clients. And so he'd really blessed us. But the greatest thing that we had from my perspective during that time was being a faith-based organization and being able to share the love of Christ to our employees. And we had Bible studies and prayer meetings, and we did book studies of Christian authors, and just to have that opportunity where many of them came to Christ. One was a youth pastor, and others, and they're engaged in the field now. And so that's why I'm very passionate to do what I do at ADF and a part of the corporate affairs team.
It sounds like you had a good journey there where you were able to be part of an organization that was integrating faith and values into your professional life. And I think that's something that probably a lot of folks that are in leadership, perhaps business owners who are believers, don't really know what can they do. Do they have to keep that quiet? Do they have to keep that to themselves? Are they potentially putting themselves in a legal situation where there's some kind of religious discrimination? So I'm looking forward to kind of unpacking some of that with you.
Excellent. Excellent.
So if you could give a little bit of an overview of ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, tell us a little bit about the scope of what ADF does.
Sure. So we're the world's largest nonprofit religious legal organization, and we keep the doors of the gospel open, and we advocate for religious liberty, free speech, sanctity of life, family, marriage, and parental rights.
Wow. Yeah. So that covers quite a bit of ground. And your focus in terms of your role, is it more kind of on the marketplace corporate side? Is that correct?
It's exactly right. So you won't see me, go up to the stairs of the Supreme Court building or up the hill for Capitol Hill, because we do get involved in that. You've probably heard of some of our cases and arguments before the Supreme Court. We're blessed to have 14 Supreme Court victories in the last 10 years. And so we also get to involve legislatively or, on public issues. And so what we do in corporate affairs that I'm a part of is that we help educate, equip, and engage Christian business leaders so that they're comfortable to have faith in the workplace and in the marketplace. I will go around the country, and I had the wonderful opportunity to speak at the Be Bold for Jesus conference a couple of years ago. And so sometimes I'll be in a situation where I'll be able to ask, members of this audience. Now, remember, these are typically Christians, but they're engaged enough that they're attending this conference. They're, not at work and doing what they need to do there. And so you would think they have a level of higher engagement. And so I'll say, how many of you believe that you can have prayer in the workplace, or that you can serve communion, even have a workplace counselor? And it's surprising that as I've been doing this for about 4 years, that there's still a good number of people say, oh, I think that's illegal, or I don't think I can do that. And well, we can get more into this, but the bottom line is that you do have a right to share your faith in the workplace, whether you're an employer and provide those opportunities, or you're an employee and you want to share your faith with somebody. Now, again, there's parameters for that we can unpack, but that you certainly have a legal right to share your faith, to be a faith-based business, to have a workplace counselor, to have prayer meetings. You certainly are entitled to do that.
Yeah, well, I think it's just amazing to be able to hear about those freedoms that we have, and the work that you guys are involved in, because it is a battleground, and probably the main way that Christians are weakened in their witness is by being silent and really just giving up ground that doesn't need to be given up. I think, Alliance Defending Freedom might be a newer organization for some listeners. I've been familiar with what you guys have been up to for over a decade. Right. Could you share just a couple highlights? You mentioned that there were several cases that had won in Supreme Court, but could you share a couple of those? I think it would be interesting to just hear a little bit, because some folks that might resonate with them.
Sure. So one that maybe you haven't heard the name, but is represented and had the blessing of representing Jack Phillips in Masterpiece Cake Shop. So Jack Phillips is a baker, has a bakery shop just right outside of Denver, and he serves everybody. Everybody's welcome to come in there, and he served everybody, all characteristics, and so that's what he does. But since he's opened his shop, he's a man of faith, and so there are certain creations when he does and creates a cake, and certain messages that he can't print, and so let's talk maybe just as an example of some of them. So let's say that someone wants to celebrate a divorce. Well, he doesn't want to create that. Let's say someone wants to celebrate Halloween. Well, he doesn't believe in that either. So he won't create a Halloween cake. Let's say that someone wants to send some type of epitaph that has maybe some slang language or some cussing words in it. He won't do that. And he's been very consistent since he's man of faith and very consistent in all this. And so one day, a same-sex couple came in, and he's happy to, whatever you want. And they said, no, we want you to create a cake that celebrates our marriage, our union. And, he said, well, that's against my faith. I appreciate you guys. Here is a list of some other bakeries that can help you. But that's just something I can't create. If you want something else, I think I've served you before. You're more than welcome to do that. But I'm just not able, because of my faith, to be able to create that kind of message for you. And so what happened with that is that they have what is called a SOGI, or sexual orientation, gender identity law, in place in the state of Colorado. And then they have the Commission on Human Rights that enforces this. So both the couple and the Colorado Commission on Human Rights went after Jack. That went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the state was really a bad actor in this, and that they were basically tying what Jack was doing and basically just standing by his faith to being a Nazi, and that, that kind of correlation. And some really strongly worded, unnecessary, and the court ruled in Jack's favor for this, but he has still been tied up in litigation. There was a trans woman that wanted to have a cake, and this was just, I think, a day or two after the Supreme Court victory that he achieved, and it was a setup. And she said, I'm basically transitioning from male to female, and I want to create a cake that's pink on the outside and blue in the inside. And and he was like, I appreciate that, but I believe that, God made us in Genesis, it talks about as male and female. And so, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Well, that's been part of litigation for about the last 7 years. So it's unfortunate. Again, I don't think we would be here and having the opportunity to represent Jack. Let's say it was a Jewish couple that came in. They're saying, we're going to have a bar mitzvah celebration for our son, and to the Muslim baker, and no one would expect the Muslim baker to create a cake that'd be against their faith. Well, it's the same situation, but I think because unfortunately you're pitting Christians and the biblical beliefs, let's say marriage is between a male and a female as God has ordained it, that's somehow we're a bigot or a homophobe, and it just really, that's sorry, please feel free to do what you want to do. And I think as Christians, we ought to maybe be a little bit less judgmental at times and a little bit more loving, but it doesn't mean we have to stand off our beliefs and our faith. And so
absolutely. And I think something that's often lost as well in the discussion from those that are attacking Christians specifically, it seems more than any other group in the country, is that having religious freedom is not just something that we're trying to protect for the Christian community. This is a good for everyone, because
exactly.
As soon as you start kind of bringing in the tightening parameters on what you can say and what you can believe with conviction, that potentially can be shifted to any specific group, and it's a loss of freedom for everyone.
Absolutely. You're talking about a current case. So before the Supreme Court, and this was argued in front of the Supreme Court by our President, CEO, and General Counsel, Kristen Wagner. It's called 303 Creative. And interestingly enough, it's called 303 Creative because the business is in Colorado, and it's about free speech. It's about that if the Be Bold for Jesus and the organization, the conferences, the podcast, and the materials that you can provide, they're awesome. But could you imagine if the government comes in and knocks on the door one day and says, Keith, you guys do such a good job of these podcasts. We want you to also carry satanic messages, and we want you to be able to incorporate that, because we don't see that the satanic people are getting a fair shake because you're doing such a good job with Christian beliefs. Well, you'd be like, you have to check your GPS to say, did I get transported to North Korea or Cuba? This is America. We have rights. We have First Amendment rights. And so how can you force us to do that? Well, and Lori 303 Creative, and Lori Smith, who's the owner, and she's a graphic designer. And so she has created a lot of different websites for disabled children and vets and animal shelters. So she's gotten involved in a lot of things that's close to her heart. Well, she wanted to do one for marriages. And as she views marriages, she means, male-female marriages or heterosexual marriages. Well, the state comes in and says, well, if you're going to do that, then we're going to fine you, because you also then have to we're going to force you, compel your speech to say that you're going to serve same-sex couples as well. And that was argued. And so that's a real important point that we're going to see. And it's not just for, as you were pointing out, Keith, it's not just for Christians. This is for Muslims, for Hindus, for Buddhists, for atheists, for agnostics, for all faiths, because it's showing that a government can come in and say, yes, we can compel your speech. We can say, if you're going to get in this business, then we can compel it. And this is something that goes directly against, our faith. And we're not talking about characteristics like race and creed and national origin. We're talking about these are opportunities that we see differently because of our faith.
Yeah. Well, we need to take a quick moment to hear from one of our sponsors, but we'll be right back.
Great.
This is Keith Atneson, founder of Freedom Summit Consulting. If you are a small business owner, you may find yourself working long days with the challenges of managing employees and making decisions with increasing economic uncertainty. We help owners identify opportunities to increase business value, develop the next generation of leaders, and design a plan for the eventual sale of their business that meets their long-term goals. Please visit freedomsummitconsulting.com or call 208-508-8255 2416 to schedule a complimentary consultation.
So, Bob, I'm curious, there's the criminal and then there's the civil aspect to lawsuits and liability. With some of these cases that are won with Supreme Court and there's not a criminal issue, is there still liability or risk potential on the civil side?
Yeah, so when I was talking about like 303 creative and those, so there are different state laws and these SOGI laws, sexual orientation, gender identity I was talking about, that you can actually receive jail time. So it can be a criminal offense that you're receiving jail time for. I think that it's also interesting to look at, we do international work. And if you look at whether it was Finland and a parliamentarian there that was a physician, and basically they were talking about same-sex marriages, and she had, and they actually did kind of an investigation on her and went back to years and years and years of some posts that she had, and basically with the faith of saying, I believe that marriage ought to be between a male and a female. And she was looking at jail time. And so fortunately and blessedly, we won the first round, but that prosecutors appealed it. And so, I think that is, whether it's Europe, I think you can see that if we don't stand up for our rights, if we don't go out and vote, because it does make a difference on platforms and what you believe in, that we will lose our rights. And we've seen that. We've seen that how over the years, we've lost a lot of ground. I think we used to be the moral majority, silent moral majority, but I don't think that's the way it is anymore. And so we will lose our rights if we don't fight for them.
Yeah, well, and we are going from a culturally Christian nation to one that has slipped into a postmodern relativist worldview. Certainly in upper academia, I think a lot of folks would say most of academia, entertainment, and it seems like much of Washington, D.C. And so there is still a preponderance of Christians in the country, but they are a silent majority, and it is a battleground for sure. So let's say I'm a small business owner and I'm thinking about, it'd be great to have an optional morning devotion and prayer time before the plant opens. Maybe I'd like to have a corporate chaplain that's available occasionally to visit with folks that are going through different challenges. Maybe I want to have a mission statement that has a biblical emphasis or citation that's kingdom oriented.
Right.
What are some of the things that I need to do to protect myself and make sure that I'm going about this in a way that, obviously, I want to be winsome in the approach. And I don't want to be offensive, but aside from my heart, it can be perceived in a lot of different ways by different folks. So what would you recommend as kind of some best practices or first steps, maybe even?
Sure. And let me couch it or frame it in this way, is that Pastor Billy Graham, former pastor, or is no longer with us, but he said the next revival is going to come in the marketplace. And you look at the Pew studies and the Gallup studies, and unfortunately, COVID, certainly impacted this, but, people aren't going to church like they used to. And so if often, and for your employees, if they're not going to hear about the love of Christ in the workplace, they might be hard pressed to hear about the love of Christ. And so, with that, I think that the Lord, if he's blessed you to be a leader of a company and you're helping run the organization, I would just challenge you to look at that and see, is it just to provide, for your family and their families, or is there something more? Is there something deeper? Is there something, an internal aspect that you can make a difference eternally for your employees? So be thinking about that. But here's 4 points that I'd certainly want to get across for individuals, leaders that want to have some level of faith. And I would recommend, kind of just starting off real slow. You don't have to go full court press. Start off with 1 or 2 things, like you had mentioned, maybe like a workplace chaplain. That's a real good start. But here's 4 things you need to keep in mind. The first one is that all these activities need to be voluntary. Okay, you can't coerce somebody. You can't force them to this. They need to be voluntary. And so if you have a Bible study or we mentioned a workplace counselor or whatever, those opportunities need to make sure that no one feels like they have to be a part of it, because they don't. And that would be a violation of what we call Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Title VII is the employment aspect of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and it applies to companies and organizations that have 15 or more employees. So the standard of race, creed, color, sex, national origin, and religion, those are protected characteristics. And so one of them is a religion. It works both ways. So that's one, is voluntary, and that's the biggest one. The second one is I would recommend providing notice of this activity. So something along the lines of sending out an email that goes out to all your employees that says Thursday at noon, we're going to have Bible study in the break room, and we're going to be serving pizza. And just a real quick point, I would have that pizza available for people that want to come in, grab the pizza, and go to their desk. Great. Don't just have the pizza for the people who listen to the Bible study.
Right. You don't want to discriminate. You want to invite everybody, but if they might find the content offensive, you're giving them a heads up. If you really don't like the vibe of this aspect, you can avoid it.
Exactly. And an important part of the invite is to include language that this activity is voluntary. And if you don't attend or participate, it will not negatively impact their performance, their benefits, their promotions, or any other aspect of their employment. Now, let's say that you'd say, well, we've got a warehouse, and so they don't have an email access. Then I'd say, well, post that notice with the descriptives I just said. Post the notice in areas where you have to post federal or state notices, your workers' comp, the EEOC notices. You have to do that somewhere. Post these, and you can say, hey, look at this. We've got this opportunity come available, and you can't say it enough. It's voluntary, and it won't impact any aspect of your employment. The third thing that I would recommend is that you do these activities off hours. So before work, during a lunch break, or after work. Two main reasons for this. The first one is that it emphasizes the voluntary nature of the activity. So this we're going to have it on a time frame that it's not going to impact it for hourly, that they're going to be paid or whatever the situation may be. The second aspect of this is that it lessens animosity amongst your employees. I'll give you an example. So let's say you had a consumer services department, and let's say there were 4 people in there. Let's say they were Mary, Joseph, Sam, and Sally. And let's say that Mary and Joseph, like you might think, would go to the Bible study. Let's say it was at 10 a.m., right in the middle of the morning, right during work hours. Well, you can imagine a conversation with Sam and Sally. I don't know what those Bible thumpers think, Sally, but but we have to cover Mary and Joseph's phones and their desk while they're getting paid to go to this Bible study. That's just not right, and that's not fair. So don't do that. Again, have it at off hours. And then the fourth thing, and you had mentioned this before, if you're going to have any type of religious activity, I'd recommend that you have a statement of faith somewhere in your corporate documents. And this is important. I'll give you a case, the Hobby Lobby case that came out several years ago. And in this case, this was based upon that Affordable Health Care Act that came down and was passed. It mandated all employers to have abortifacients or abortion drugs as part of their healthcare plans for their employees. They couldn't say no. Well, Hobby Lobby and the Green family that wonderfully owns the Hobby Lobby organization, they fought that and went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in their favor, saying a company, a business can have faith. And what they did is that the courts are able to test the sincerity of the company's faith. And so they look for, where is it in Hobby Lobby's documents that says that they're a Christian organization, or they follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, whatever it may be. And they were able to find that. As a matter of fact, if you go pull the opinion from the Supreme Court, you'll see what they have in their corporate documents that the court was able to test and found in their favor of their sincerity of their belief. So all 4 of those aspects are really important to have. Now, we do have a resource. It's called the Faith in the Faith in the Workplace Guide, and you can get this on our website. And as a PDF version, we can also provide a hard copy like this one for you. And in Appendix 1 of this guide, it actually has examples of what you can put in for your statement of faith. And when I say corporate documents, bylaws, articles of incorporation, partnership agreements, whatever it may be, because if you ever get called in the carpet or have a claim like Hobby Lobby did, and it's based upon your faith, then you're able to look at it. Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cake Shop, he had statement of faith. I dare say that if Hobby Lobby didn't have a statement of faith in their corporate documents and otherwise couldn't prove their faith, they would not have won that case because it was based upon their religious belief.
Wow, that is great advice. I think I captured all 4 of those. This needs to be anything that's integrating faith that might potentially interact with your employees. It's voluntary, that you're giving them notice of anything that might be coming up, whether it's written or email, that it's occurring off hours and not disrupting folks that are not part of this potential gathering or community. And then that you have a statement of faith in your corporate documents. So that's great stuff. Well, Bob, we're going to take another quick break to hear from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Join us October 13th through the 15th at the Spokane Convention Center for the Be Bold for Jesus Conference, featuring Greg Laurie of Jesus Revolution, Jeff Foxworthy, the funniest man you'll ever meet, Lee Strobel, author of A Case for Christ, Ken Ham of the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum, recording artist Danny Goki, and founding member of Real Life Ministries, Pastor Jim Putman. You will be equipped to live out your faith in boldness and connect with like-minded believers who share your passion for Christ. Don't miss this life-changing event. Register now at bb4j.com.
So, Bob, I'm curious, Colorado, Washington, there's been a few states that have kind of been hot spots where these cases got pushed all the way up to the Supreme Court. How much of the state that you're domiciled or your business is registered in impacts the landscape? Or is it really just eventually just going to rise up to a federal level?
Great question, Keith. So let me address it this way. When we talked about whether it was state of Colorado, Washington, Oregon, New York, Connecticut, there are 22 states plus the District of Columbia that have SOGI laws on their books. And so you have to be careful there. Now, there is what is called the Equality Act that's been before Congress, and this would change the protected classes I mentioned before in the Title VII, the Civil Rights Act, would change the definition of sex. So when it was passed in 1964, you can only imagine that it was just male-female. That was just the binary question that sex was talking about. They want to include sexual orientation, gender identity. And I'll give you an example of the impact that can have. So in Anchorage, Alaska, they have a SOGI law in place, and there is a organization called the Hope Center, and it's run by Executive Director Sherry Laurie. And there was a gentleman that came in one night, and during the day, this Hope Center is a food soup kitchen, and so they can come in and everybody, serves everybody. But at night, it becomes a women's shelter. And you can only imagine the backgrounds for these women and abuse that they may have suffered. Unfortunately, that probably most likely at the hands of men. And so this is kind of a respite for them and a place of safety for them. Well, this gentleman comes up, and he had been, looked like he'd been in a fight or something like that. And he said, well, I want to have access to your Hope Center for the evening. And they said, I'm sorry, you're welcome to come back and tomorrow. We have a soup kitchen. We'd love to feed you, but this is a women's shelter at night. And he says, well, I'm identifying as a female and I want to come in. And they said, I'm sorry, sir, we're not going to be able to do that. Now, they did take him to a clinic and get his injuries and cuts and all that bandaged up, and they were able to provide him with food and shelter for that evening. So the gentleman in the state, and really to say thank you to the Hope Center, sued him. And that went up to the Alaska Supreme Court, and fortunately they were successful. And the Hope Center was, and Sherry Laurie was, and we were on her behalf. But it just goes to where that can impact organizations or businesses when you start mixing and matching, characteristics that God gave you, our race, our sex, and start putting in ones that we might have some, and we do, some strong but some reasonable differences about. We can disagree to or agree to disagree on those. So that talks about some of the impact of that. So if this Equality Act passes, and not this legislative session, but the last one, it passed in the House of Representatives. This isn't a Republican Democrat type thing. I mean, we Christians on both sides of the aisle, but all the Democrats voted for it. It's part of their platform, and a handful of Republicans voted for it. And it got in the Senate and just kind of died in the Senate. But if it would have somehow passed in the Senate, then it would have gone to President Biden's desk, and that's part of his platform, is he would sign it, and that would really change. That would be the federal law that would change it. Right now, we're just dealing with on a state by state basis. You got to be careful though, because like in states like Texas, they don't have a SOGI law in place, but the cities of San Antonio, Fort Worth, Austin do have SOGI laws in place. So you just have to be careful of that. And again, as Christians, we don't want to treat anybody differently with love and respect. But if they're going to demand just to be merely identifying as a male, identifying as a female, and having access to your warehouse, restrooms, and shower facilities and all that, well, then we need to start standing up, because I don't think that's right.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I really appreciated, Bob, how you framed this around that there's really an opportunity in the marketplace to advance the gospel.
Yeah.
And this is not just about an us versus them, or, we're right and they're wrong. There's a lot more at stake in terms of the Great Commission and sharing the gospel. And although some of these things can feel a little bit uncomfortable to have to be bold and take a little bit of a risk or exposure, there's a net gain, and not just for the kingdom, which is the ultimate gain, but also for the business. I think with the great resignation that we've been through coming through COVID, and a lot of challenges with staffing and getting folks to engage, having an organization that authentically cares and loves on employees and customers and vendors and community just creates a more attractive environment that people are compelled to the point where I've seen cultures that are really healthy and thriving. They're not having to post a bunch of job openings on Indeed, because their team members are and telling their own community, hey, this is a great place to work and we're hiring, and can it really change the dynamics. But obviously we need to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove on some of these legal potential potholes that you can run through.
Keith, let me add this to this, is that, in the Bible, it talks about that Jesus has prepared a place in heaven for us. And I believe that one of the benefits of this place for heaven is that one day we're going to walk into a room and we're going to see a lot of people that we had something to do to influence them for Christ. It had something to do with it. Maybe they've shared our testimony and that's all we did. Maybe we just planted a seed. Maybe we helped them to haul the whole road. But I believe that's one of the treasures that we store up. And to have, you can go into the room and have your employees or your vendors that says, I didn't really know about Christ, or I thought this and this. I had a bad experience at church and I just had it against God, or we had some real difficult problems. But you were showing the love of Christ. You were a beacon to me, and that made a difference. And just think about from that perspective that you'll get to see impact that you had for eternity for the love of Christ.
Amen. That is great encouragement. So, Bob, for folks that are trying to figure out, you've got this PDF, and that, again, one more time, the name of the PDF and also the website.
Yeah. So the website is adflegal.org. And then if you want this Faith in the Workplace guidebook, just put Faith in the Workplace without any spaces after the .org//Faith in the Workplace, no spaces, and then it'll take you to this where you just put your information in, and then you'll be sent a free copy of our PDF.
And so the next step in kind of requesting additional help, they can go to that same website and reach out to, I would assume, contact us. And you guys, I'm assuming, are fairly available, willing, and eager to engage folks in this discussion if they are having some legal concerns or wanting to make sure they have their ducks in a row, or maybe there's already been some kind of pushback. That's a great resource that's available.
Exactly. So if you go just to the front page, there is a button at the top that says legal help, and you press that, and then that will provide you with a form that you'll fill out. So you might say, I've got a challenge with this, or I need some help with this. And we typically can either do that in-house for you, meaning within ADF, or we also have 4,800 allied attorneys across the nation that also might be able to help you. Typically at first on a pro bono basis. With ADF, it's all pro bono, but with them, and let's say you need some help with contracts or real estate or taxes, those are areas we don't get involved in, but we can refer you to Christian attorneys in your area that do specialize in those areas.
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate you taking time to come on the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. And I'd like to invite you, would you be willing to pray for our listeners, that just encourage them that they can be bold for Jesus in how they lead, how they make decisions with their organization?
Absolutely. Be my pleasure.
Thank you.
Gracious Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity and Be Bold for Jesus, Christ people, and just their podcast. We thank you for all the listeners and the viewers today, and just, Lord, just ask them to be bold, to see that the love of Christ is in them, and that they want to share that, and they can be a beacon in their communities, in the workplace and marketplace. Lord, as it says in your word in John 15, abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit itself, neither can you, unless you abide in me. I'm the vine and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. In Jesus' holy name, amen.
Amen. Bob, thanks again for joining us on the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. Thank you to our listeners. We'll see you next time. Take care, Bob.
Thanks, Keith. Blessings.
Thanks for joining us. We pray that you have been empowered by today's discussion. The Be Bold for Jesus podcast is supported by listeners just like you. So be sure to subscribe and share the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. We appreciate any donations God may put on your heart in support of this podcast, our weekly He's the Solution Ministries sermons, the thousands of free Bibles that we send out annually, and the Be Bold for Jesus annual conference. God bless you, and be sure to tune in next week.